Ashley Moser is the co-founder and chief commercial officer of MelodyArc, a technology company focused on AI and human-in-the-loop orchestration for enterprise tasks. With that, Ashley, we are excited to hear your presentation and welcome to the event.
All right. Thank you, Michael, and excited to be here, team. Today, I am going to talk about human in the loop. AI works. That's why we're all here. But that's not really the question anymore. The question now is, how can you actually deploy it in work that matters and in a way that actually works itself? Work where mistakes can cost you customers, where those edge cases are endless, and where you can't just say like, sorry, the bot got confused, our bad. That is what we're going to talk about today, and what changes when you think about the way that AI can play with your people and actually work together in the same process. So we'll start here with the definition, because human in the loop has or is starting to at least get thrown around a lot. On the left-hand side, you can see a typical automation path. AI does some work, it hits a wall, hands off to a person, that person starts over, they re-verify the customer in a support example, they regather context, they redo a bunch of work, refigure out what's going on. That AI's work there is basically wasted, and not to mention what's happening on the other end of the line. On the right is an actual human in the loop example. AI and people working together inside the same process natively, woven together throughout the task. So back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, making each other better, bettering the ball in soccer terms. And there's no real hard break here. So that is the key idea of human in the loop, how AI, your people, and the deterministic logic, there's also a place for that, the very strict if this then that rules, can all collaborate inside the same workflow, doing what they're best at, and not in kind of these like siloed substitute ways. That is, one of the current paradigms. So where does this matter the most? Where can you see this in your organizations? Anywhere really where you have a business process operation where experts or managers are designing how that work should be done. So once they're doing that, then associates are going and executing that work at scale, where you have 10, 50, 100, 1,000 people doing that to the best of their ability with their best intent, and improvising where they need to, because the corpus of knowledge and the infinite number of things that can happen within your company require them to improvise. And then you have users who are served on the other end, whether that be in a synchronous example or in an asynchronous way. So think things like customer support, vendor onboarding, compliance workflows, logistics operations, back office billing, data merchandising work, the high volume expertise, outcome sensitive processes that are really important to the outcomes of your organization. And the challenge here in this example or in this paradigm is that expertise can degrade as it kind of flows down here. Experts, put what they know into training, SOPs, wikis, documentation, internal tools, external point solutions, you name it. I'm sure you have all of those in your organization, but it's never really complete. Again, just the knowledge keeps growing and growing and growing. You can never really write it all down. And so associates end up using their training to assume what they think is the best outcome and go into that. And users experience these gaps and inconsistencies and inefficiencies all the time. So, this is the kind of shift where you can't just automate and pray, where getting it wrong, has real consequences. All right, let's quickly look at how automation has evolved and how we've gotten to where we're at today. So era one, long ago, a decade ago, was chatbots and RPA. Task comes in, automation attempts it, succeeds maybe 5 to 10% of the time, but hey, that is a lot better than zero, especially at enterprise scale. And if it fails, it's a full handoff to your associate. They redo everything. It's a siloed approach we just talked about. No context is passed. No learning is captured. The human judgment that resolved those edge cases is never logged, and it's not really that great of an experience. The next era is the era that we're kind of in right now, AI agents. So it's the same flow, but AI means that there's a higher success rate, which is great. Maybe 20 to 30%, depending on the task. So a 3, 5, 10x improvement. So definitely a real improvement. I don't want to minimize that. But the thing here is that when it fails, the failure mode is pretty much identical. It's a handoff to a person. The person starts over. Most context is lost, or if it's given to the person, it's really hard to ingest in real time or in a way they actually want to use it. No learning is captured and piped back into that AI agent to do better. We don't really know how the person resolved the task or completed the task in this instance. So better AI with same architecture and really the same ceiling. So the gap here in both of these examples is that our teams end up absorbing the gap. When AI can't handle something, we punt it to a person. That person's judgment resolves the issue, but then it poof, evaporates. Doesn't get captured, doesn't make the next task easier, and it doesn't come back. So every time you use a person as an escape hatch, you're really throwing away the opportunity to have this data to make your system smarter. And by the way, like providing diminishing your end user experience. And there's really two failure modes here. The first one is the one we've been talking about. It's the handoff waste. AI can't finish it, so it escalates it. You do a lot of rework. The end user has to repeat themselves. They have to wait. Associates are, your teams are frustrated that they have to do this. There's downstream delays if it's an async task, and you're essentially still paying the same or even more for that work to be done in addition to what you're paying for the AI. The other failure mode, which we haven't talked about yet, is if you're aggressive and you push through the automation, you push through to finish it, but it's wrong. So now you've got a customer problem, a compliance problem, or worse, depending on what the task is. Plus, from that error, you'll likely pay for it later, and you might have pissed off the end user. So ultimately, it ends up being a pretty poor experience for your teams, for your users, for your customers, and there's real costs during or after the task. So enter human in the loop. Task comes in, AI takes the first chunk of steps, and then instead of a break when it doesn't know what to do next, it's really just a checkpoint. That person, your teammate, steps in, makes a judgment call. That decision is captured and picked right back up by the AI and keeps going and going and going. Do another checkpoint, another decision, AI finishes it. It's kind of the better of the ball analogy that we talked about before. So notice here that a person has only touched the task for a few moments, but an AI ends up handling, around 90% of the task. So there's actually, in this example, in human in the loop, there's actually more, you're able to use more automation and more AI on a objective basis, not less, because you have that context preserved and you're able to get to the end of the task with it. And importantly, like every judgment call that your person makes is captured in this process. And not to minimize the most important part, which is the end user or the end result of this task is accurate. It's a good experience. There was no backtracking, and it is done efficiently with your team's time and resources. So the way you can think about the changes in the model is really in three different kind of buckets. The first bucket is context. In the old model, context is minimal or lost entirely at handoff. And the person who picks up the task doesn't know what they're doing, what failed, what the customer already said, they start cold. In the new model, context is preserved through the entire task and recorded at the end. And you have that going forward. Judgment is the second bucket. In the old model, judgment is applied but not retained. The person, your people make a judgment call, they resolve the issue, and that's it. It's gone, poof, gone. Used once and kept nowhere. And not to mention that as your teams get bigger and bigger, something that one of your team members made a judgment call on or learned is not then translated to the rest of your team. And so, people may be having the same problems in their head that they're working around on the front lines, and you'll never know it because they're handling it because they're great at their jobs. And then lastly is associate or team member effort. In the old model, it's binary. Either AI handles everything or the person handles everything. It's 0 or 100. In the new model, this effort is concentrated in the moments that actually matter. And so you're getting like high leverage on the knowledge of your team member for the amount of time and attention that they're spending on it. And so it's essentially the same work, just a different architecture and a different way to come at it. Okay, and then this is where things get interesting and where I'm really excited about what the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years hold. When you are doing human in the loop orchestration, you are capturing judgment inside that workflow. I feel like I keep talking about it. And so you are therefore creating what we like to call intra-process data. This is the data where, you're not only recording the outcome, but you're recording all of the decision points that led to that outcome for that specific unique task or instance. And this is a totally new novel data set that most companies don't have. And so the reasoning that is used to live in everyone's head is now captured in the workflow, and it can start feeding a continuous improvement loop. And so judgment gets captured, patterns start emerging. Some of those patterns become automatable. And honestly, some of those patterns, maybe you don't even implement them in a new technology or a new AI, but really they just become process improvements, continuous improvements, Lean Six Sigma improvements, root cause analysis that you can go take to other teams in your organization. And you actually have data behind it that were, originally being covered up. And so this makes human in the loop a moat for organizations. When someone leaves, expertise stays. When they join, they inherit it. The system will get smarter and smarter, and the loop will get tighter and tighter over time. And your teams get smarter and smarter. All right. And then lastly, the golden question: where should you apply this? You can think about it in like a 2x2, in terms of stakes. So how high stakes is the process or the task that we're working on in terms of money, customer experience, time, risk, however you define it for your unique teams. And then the variability. How variable are the different outcomes to the inputs? So low stakes, low variability. Don't overthink this one. Just automate and move on. It's a great place to experiment, do a bunch of experiments, monitor, change, and adapt really quickly. If it is a low stakes process, but there's high variability, it's much, much, much harder to automate. And so here we would want to use human in the loop for what we call coverage. You want to catch all of like the weird end edge cases without like babysitting every single task. These edge cases won't kill you, but they will pile up enough to make you, your teams, and your customers not trust the process and not trust the automation, which in the long run is bad for culture and customer experience. For high stakes processes that have an outcome that is very visible or high cost, but the process itself is low variability, we suggest here using human in the loop as a bridge. So kind of like a trust but verify situation. You're earning the right to automate in this. This is actually interestingly a place where we see a lot of tech teams want to focus their resources and go automate these use cases. It's not to tail. But the ops and the P&L owners are very resistant and reticent to do that because there's so much risk in these. So, even if you can get an automation solution that still has a 2 to 5% error rate, if I'm the P&L owner for that, that's a risk that's too high for me if it's a, $100 million process. And so human in the loop here is actually a great bridge and a great win-win solution where you can start with human in the loop and incrementally increase your amount of automation within that process as you trust it. And then lastly, high stakes and high variability processes. Human in the loop here is great for specific instance judgment. So every case is different, but there's oftentimes a macro level kind of flow. So we'll use AI and automation to automate the real tactical kind of parts of these processes. But almost every time a decision is needed, either a person is making that decision or suggesting that decision or approving it. And so in that way here, like human in the loop is load bearing. What's really cool about these instances is they tend to be very specialized teams, and it's very hard to, they're very smart and they're capturing a lot of data in their heads. So we're actually getting it out into the system and logging it here. And you can see what actually makes these processes variable and see if there's anything that's causing that you can help improve. And then the last thing I'll say when we're talking about applying human in the loop is that it's a great way to, we kind of call it like as a ramp, but sometimes you don't want to, and probably shouldn't integrate and automate every single thing in a process from day one. And this is how things get stalled, how things never launch, how things have low ROI. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good when it comes to applying AI and automation, and human loop is one way to do that. So you can ship a process if you're orchestrating it, and you maybe don't need to have every single integration or every single API done for that process. You can start collecting the data and increment into that automation in a way where you're still getting a big benefit from AI, but you're not waiting for it to be perfect. And this is something that we see a lot of teams do and a lot of teams have success with, especially because once you're doing it, you have the data log. So you know where you're going to get the most bang for your buck in terms of improving the process. All right, that's the end. So human in the loop is a different way of thinking of how to implement AI in your organization. And it means really designing like AI and people as collaborators on the same platform. And counterintuitively, also, it is more automation, not less, and despite the misnomer. And so I encourage you to look at your organizations, think about how you can implement this, and then really think of it from bottoms up or first principles on how you might want to architect that. Thanks.
Ashley, thank you for that fantastic presentation. For everyone that's listening in live, Ashley will be on our next Q&A panel, which is coming up in just a few minutes. So type any questions that you have into the Q&A box that you see right in front of you, and we'll get to as many of those questions as we can during the live Q&A panel.